Greetings, Dave Knackwitz here, aka Redshifted for Poker VIP Coaching, bringing to you a video on the question, am I a winning player? We're going to be discussing some ideas behind the analysis of variance and hypothesis testing, so I hope you find this video fairly informative. A little bit about myself. I was a mathematics instructor for upwards of 20 years, so I suppose a little experience is always nice. I am also an avid poker player, and I am particularly interested in questions that concern what you might call the poker mindset. That is, how we bring our intuition to bear on problems of mathematical and probabilistic interest. So with that, let's map out a little plan for what this video is going to accomplish. To start, I want to supply you with a little motivation for the issue, define the problem. We're going to be attaching a model to this, a statistical model that will help us address this question. I do want to talk a little bit about volatility in poker, an interesting topic in and of itself. Afterwards, there'll be some calculations presented, and then we'll discuss some of the implications for this problem. First, just to supply some motivation, I believe that this question, am I a winning player, the attack on what exactly our win rate actually means, is something that is important to just about any player in poker, regardless of stakes, regardless of skill level. So I think that there's quite a bit of practical use to addressing this issue. It can inform us as to whether or not we want to move up stakes, move down stakes, possibly take shots at higher levels. There are many poker variants out there also, and it can inform our choice as to which one of these we might want to pursue. I could also think that the question addresses the number of tables we might want to play, as well as things involving bankroll management. So I think that there's a lot of immediate practical importance for the answering of this question. It also serves as a gateway to our understanding of statistics generally. There are a lot of statistics present in your database, and interpreting them can sometimes be difficult. If you can think of it this way, I suppose statistics and probability are the tools of the trade for a typical poker player, so understanding how these work inside our database can be an extremely useful thing. I suppose there's also what you might call an academic interest to this question. There is, in fact, a world outside of poker, and there are many real-world applications that statistics and probability can answer for us. I will address some of these questions as I go through the video. They sort of turn up here and there by comparison, so I think that there's a lot to be gotten out of consideration of those issues. One of the other things I'm particularly interested in, though, is what this type of question says about our intuition and how it intersects mathematics and poker generally. And one of the important questions that can come out of this is just how we approach mathematical problems, and so I think that there's some value in that as well. As if this wasn't enough, there is an opportunity to win a poker coaching video that comes out of this. It's a great prize. It lets you see yourself play, get yourself critiqued by an expert, and there'll be a challenge question at the end. Anybody can win. So that seems to be a strong motivation. And let's face it, if you're going to sit through 30 minutes of a mathematics video, you really should have the opportunity to win something. So with that, I think we have enough motivation. Let's move on to a statement of our problem. Am I a winning player? In order to pursue this, we're going to start with an example just to get something concrete in front of us. And the example we'll use is player A, and he notices by examining his database that he's winning at a 5 big blind per 100 rate over a 5,000 hand sample. Our job is to call him, if we can, quote, a winning player. Now, in order to pursue this topic, we are going to tackle this in a mathematical way. What we're really looking to do is to decide if this result that we see here from player A could have occurred by chance. This is actually a true indication of whether or not the player has a skill advantage, you might say, as opposed to strictly a card advantage, and which one of those is responsible for that 5 big blind per 100 win rate. In order to define what a winning player is, we're going to take a somewhat mathematical definition, and this is someone who is extremely unlikely to be a break-even player. Now, this does sound like a definition that only a mathematician might love, but it does have a certain precision to it. It essentially tries to identify what the so-called null hypothesis might be and to separate player A from a typical break-even player. A couple of things to keep in mind about this analysis. We're not going to try and show exactly what the true win rate is. what we're really trying to do is simply decide if player A is in fact a winning player at all. We're going to make no statements about whether he's a 1 big blind per 100 winner or a 10 big blind per 100 winner. Just under this observation of the win rate of 5 big blinds per 100, is this sufficient to be able to show that he is in fact a winning player of any kind. Also keep in mind we're not actually out to prove anything. We're going to express all our analysis in probabilistic terms, so what we're really trying to do is develop a likelihood. And in this, there's always going to be a slight chance that things might go the other way, but even if it's a strong likelihood, we are still not trying to prove the situation in what you might call a geometric sense. We are simply expressing a probabilistic statement. So with this, let's move on and discuss that elusive thing called a break-even player, describe what it is, and start developing a model, a statistical model for how we're going to approach this question. Obviously, a break-even player is someone who ends up, well, you might expect with an EV of 0, who ends up back at with 0 profit. And what we're going to do is consider this sort of like a coin flip model. What we're saying here is that the break-even player has an equal chance of winning or losing in any hand that he plays. So if we looked at a graph of his results, we might see on a per hand basis, this is a 5,000 sample run, we see the typical random walk in which the player starts at 0. He sort of surfs up and down across the 0 line and ends up positive in this case after spending a certain amount of time below the line, a certain amount of time above the line. What we'll do here is we'll just assume that heads is a win, tails is a loss. And you can see that even though we had a positive expectation that he would end up at 0, he doesn't always have to. In fact, it will be typical that he deviates from that 0 line a certain percentage of the time, even if it is his expected value at the end. We are going to be looking at a particular measure of that deviation. We are going to be interested in the chance that he ends up somewhere close to the line 68% of the time. And what we want to do is establish a kind of a limit or band that defines when he will land within 68% of the 0 line. Now this amount of deviation from 0 is pretty much a standard inside of statistical analysis. So standard, in fact, it's given a name, the standard deviation, logically enough. And what we're saying when we describe things in terms of the standard deviation is that we are looking for the bands that capture 68% of the variance of this typical coin flip. It's otherwise known as sigma, and I'll be referring to it by that name throughout the video. Now there is a formula that can generate this for us. I'm not going to present that formula to you just now. You'll have to take my word for it. You will see it towards the end of the video, where you'll need it in order to solve the challenge question. But what we will say is that over a sample of 5,000 flips, the standard deviation will equal about 35. That is, we anticipate that we'll have an excess of heads over tails of 35, or an excess of tails over heads of about 35, and we expect to see this 68% of the time. Another way to put this is if we establish those limits at, well, half would be 2,500, so we expect 2,535 heads, 2,465 heads, and the coin will probably land somewhere between those two limits, 68% of the time. What I want to do now is give you a sense of what the significance of this result will be and how we usually interpret that significance and how we test for it. So if we look at that coin flip model and we say that 68% of the time the coin will capture the variance in this coin flip, what we want to know is what is the probability of exceeding that value. What I've drawn here, not to scale, is the 68% band that captures 68% of the variance, and it should be pretty obvious that 16% of the time we will have an excess of coins above that 1 sigma mark, and 16% of the time we will have an excess of tails below that 68% mark. If you exceed that 1 sigma, that is, if you had 35 more heads than tails, you could say that there was a 16% that the event had been caused by chance. Now that doesn't occur too commonly, so I would have to say, and a reasonable English expression for this would be that you had a likely significant result if in fact you saw more than 35 heads over tails. We can also claim that if we saw 70 more heads than tails, That is, if we had a 2 sigma variation, we would say that there was a 5% chance that the event was demonstrably significant. Now, 5% is a fairly unlikely situation to occur, and it's usually taken as a general criteria in most behavioral and social studies for establishing that the result that you are looking at was in fact significant. So I guess we could say that it was publishably significant if in fact we see this amount of deviation. Of course, it's possible to apply an even stricter standard to this data. We could insist upon a 3 sigma variation, or 105 excess of heads over tails, and this will only occur 1% of the time. In that case, we would say, I think reasonably, that we had established a significant result beyond a reasonable doubt. And that makes a certain amount of sense. If you're going to put some guy in jail for 20 years and throw away the key, well, you want to make sure that his guilt is based on only a 1% chance that the evidence presented could have been acquired randomly. We are almost ready to actually begin our calculations, but we need one other parameter, one other factor, before we can translate this coin flip model into a realistic poker simulation. And that is, we need to know how much we are playing for on any individual coin flip. So for example, if I ended up with 35 more heads than tails and we were playing for $1 per flip, then I would end up $35 a head. If on the other hand we were playing for $10 per flip, it would be $350. Now, if you recall, player A presented his results to us in terms of how much money he had actually won, that is, in terms of his win rate. So in order to separate player A from a typical break-even player, we would have to know how much money was being played in the coin flip on any given flip. What we're really asking here is, what is the size or the amplitude of the fluctuation? In the case that I just described, we had established this at the beginning. In the case of poker, we would have to actually go ahead and figure out what exactly the average size of any given wager in poker might be. And it's that question that we'll turn our attention to right now. The words amplitude, volatility, and turnover are going to be used pretty much synonymously here. Volatility actually has a specialized meaning inside of time series analysis, but I think that for our purposes, we'll treat each of these terms interchangeably. What we're actually trying to accomplish is describe the size of the total amount bet in big blinds per hand. And we're going to do this empirically. That is, we are going to actually go inside to a database, could be your database or mine or a third-party database, and actually try and come to a valid determination of what this number might be. Let me give you an example of what I have in mind. Here might be the first 5 hands that our break-even player plays in the course of a poker match. You can see that on the first hand he scoops the big blind, second he loses 0.5, he wins 3 on the third, folds the fourth, and loses 4 on the fifth. Like a good break-even player, his wins are equal to his losses, and what we can say here is that he has totally wagered over the course of these 5 hands 9 big blinds. Doing a quick division, we see from this particular example that this player has 1.8 big blinds per hand at risk, in actual risk, over the course of this match. Now obviously this is a very small sample, and we want to extend this result. We're going to have to look at a much larger sampling of hands in order to come to a determination of what that actual number is. Now I have done that, at least sort of. I just went to somebody's third-party database, one of these hand resellers, just examined what I consider to be reasonable break-even players, examined a bunch of them. You can get at this number in a lot of different ways as well. But generally speaking, you find that between 2 and 3 big blinds per hand is the total amount wagered on any given hand, typically about 2.5 big blinds per hand. Now you can also get at this number by examining the average pot size that you might see on the poker site's statistical column list. There are some hazards in doing that, and I hope to discuss some of those in the forum. But nevertheless, you can kind of get a sense that 2.5 big blinds per hand would mean that you are turning over your stack about every 100 hands. You're turning over about 250 big blinds. My guess is that most people would find this number fairly reasonable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a value of 3 to express the total volatility in this break-even players match. The reason for that is because I want to try and err on the side of caution, you might say, by attaching the maximum amount of volatility that I can to that's within reason, to the break-even player. Armed with this number, we can actually translate that coin flip model directly into a model for what a poker player might experience at the table. What we're going to do is we're going to compare the amount won by player A with the amount a break-even player might expect to win just by chance. So what we'll do is we'll establish the maximum size of the variation for player A, for maximum size of the variation for the break-even player, compare it with player A, and then come to a decision as to whether or not player A can claim legitimately that he can separate himself from the break-even player. In order to do this, we have to sort of get our variables together just to keep things in order. W is going to be our win rate, which in our case is going to be 5 big blinds per 100 for player A. N is going to be the number of hands. In the case, the sample size was 5,000. A is the amplitude. As I discussed previously, we're going to use the value of 3 big blinds per hand to represent the average volatility of the break-even player. C is going to be a constant, and it's going to describe how many sigma of certainty we are interested in demonstrating. In this particular case, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we're going to use the value of 2 sigma. The reason is player A is essentially trying to demonstrate that he is not a break-even player, so we'll call this a sort of publishable result. On the left-hand side, as stated, we'll put the amount in big blinds that player A has actually won. On the right-hand side, the amount of maximum variation that we might expect out of a break-even player. The formula. I'm leaving out the equal sign just now, but that's because I'm going to be treating this as a comparative study, so you can insert that if you wish at some later stage. The win rate times the number of hands is obviously going to tell us how much money the player A has actually won. The formula with the appropriate substitutions is going to be given on the right-hand side. The square root of 5,000 is in fact 71. And when we do this comparison, we see that on the left-hand side, the amount that the player A has actually won is 250 big blinds. The maximum amount of variation under a 2 sigma criteria is going to be 213 big blinds. Since 250 is in fact greater than 213, we can claim that the amount that player A has won actually exceeds the amount of legitimate variation we might expect out of a break-even player. And so from this, we can conclude that player A is demonstrably a winning player. Now, as I said, you can insert the equal sign between the expressions on the left and the right. And if you did that, you would, in fact, be able to solve if you knew the other variables for any variable on either side of that equation. And that's something that you might want to be able to do in order to answer the challenge question at the end. Before turning to that, though, let's take a look at some of the further ideas and some of the implications and assumptions that went into this model. The first thing I want to discuss is that magic number, the volatility in poker. It's obvious that there are going to be a lot of factors that influence this, and I'm sure you can think of most of them. One of the factors is going to be how loose or tight the break-even player might be, or how loose or tight the table is that he happens to be sitting on. You can also imagine that this number is going to vary depending on the stack sizes, the stakes that are being played at, the number of players, and there are probably some other factors you can think of. Nevertheless, I think that this number will in fact converge at some point, and I think that there are some causes for optimism in assessing what this number is. The first is that by my own personal observation, it seems as if the value converges relatively rapidly to that 2.5 value. This seems to be true for a fairly wide variety of stakes, and it essentially says maybe that poker is perhaps a little bit more of a sedate game than we actually want to give it credit for. I mean, it's easy to remember, the all-ins and the big pots and all the rest. Nevertheless, it does have a certain sort of predictability to the major events that occur inside of it. Now, that is not true for many of the other data sets that we might examine in the real world. As a quick example, If you were examining earthquake data, say in California, you could look back 100 years and think you had found pretty much, or was able to capture most of the variation and most of the infrequent events that you might expect. If you did that, though, you would almost certainly be omitting the 1906 earthquake that happened under San Francisco. And since that was one of the most devastating, you can imagine that your data set, your examination of the volatility of earthquakes, of earthquake data, if you want to call it that, really has to go back quite a long way in order to capture all of the potential variation. It seems as if the game of no limit hold'em doesn't really require that type of extensive data set in order to come to a determination. One of the other nice things about no limit hold'em is we can make an assumption of independence, which essentially means that the events that occur in one hand are not tied to the events that occur in the next hand. Now, this is not an assumption, again, that you can make from much real-world data. For example, the typical example is the stock market, in which prices in the stock market can become very cross-correlated to other prices in the stock market. So if enough people hit the sell button, that causes more people to hit the sell button. It's pretty much a panic can ensue, and you can see that you can produce some extremely high velocity events on the basis of this. One of the things about poker is that this can also happen. Let us say if the player decides to go on tilt, then there might be some cross-correlation, state dependency between any two given hands. However, for our purposes, I think we can neglect that. Another reason we might have for optimism is that effectively the amplitude of any particular variation in no limit hold'em is capped. Even though no limit hold'em has the words no limit in it, there is in fact a limit, and that's the amount of your stack that you can actually bring onto the table at any one time. So based on this fact alone, we might expect that the number will in fact converge to something like its reasonable value after a relatively short amount of time. Another question I wanted to think about that I think is pretty interesting as it applies to this model, and that is there a relationship between the win rate and the volatility? There are a number of players, I'm guilty of this myself, who just prefer not to play 150 big blinds deep, so what they do is they get up and leave the table. What they're trying to do there is suppress their volatility. In other cases, you might want to stay if you thought that there was a weaker player with a big stack sitting to your right. What you're trying to do in this case is maximize your volatility when you think that there is an advantage in doing so. So I think that these types of questions raise a certain amount of discussion as well. One of the other things I wanted to say is, what does this result that we've established say about our intuition? One of the things that will happen is if you present this data, this example to, the average poker player, they will probably tell you that the sample size is simply not sufficient to draw this type of conclusion. And that's kind of reflective of the fact that most people seriously underrate the power of statistical influence. This can happen in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different contexts. And just to give you one example of where that happens, it happens most often on election night. So if you're watching the election returns, you will see the talking head on television say that they just took a 5,000 person random sample of the electorate, and when they did this, they noticed that candidate A is ahead by 52.5% compared to the other guy, who's now behind by 47.5%, and they are prepared to announce that candidate A is going to be the winner. Well, when this happens, a lot of people are extremely dismissive of this type of result. I mean, they say, come on, it's only 5,000 people, that's 1% of the electorate, 52.5%, that's barely above background. They'll be very dismissive of this type of extensive generalization. What they probably don't realize, though, is that this particular result, and I'll leave it as an exercise for the listener if they want to use the formula in order to determine this for themselves, is that candidate A is actually hitting that third sigma criteria for certainty. And in fact, you can say in this particular example that candidate A will win beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, when you present it like this, people will actually get mad at you for suggesting this, especially if they like candidate B. They shouldn't get mad, at least not yet, because one of the things that also follows from the logic of statistical analysis is that the conclusion drawn is going to be completely independent of the size of the population from which it is drawn. And what that means is that this result, this 5,000 person random sample of voters, is going to be good regardless of whether the election is a 100,000 person electorate, a million person electorate, 100 million person electorate, or on the day that we decide to elect a global world leader and all 9 billion registered voters on the planet decide to vote. This same 5,000 person random sample of voters displaying the same characteristics is going to be enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that candidate A will in fact win. Well, speaking of winning, let's turn our attention to the contest. To win the free poker coaching video, you've got to answer the following question, and maybe you can guess what it is. You have to determine whether or not you are in fact a winning player. What you have to do is you have to go into your database, apply the formula that was supplied in one of the previous slides, do the calculations, show the work, and make a determination as to whether or not you in fact are a winning player. The answer should be expressed in sigma and couched in terms of sigma. So what you really want to do is express your answer as to how much sigma you can actually make this claim, if you in fact want to make this claim. You can get bonus points as well. You can extend the model. You can discuss some of the assumptions that I made going into it. There were quite a lot of there's a lot of room for discussion. In particular, I'm interested in determining something about that number of average volatility that a break-even player might experience. I barely scratched the surface in terms of how this model might be extended or the different types of situations in which it might apply. So there's plenty of room for discussion there. Another way to get bonus points, super duper bonus points, is you can do the research on this. And by this, I mean you can go ahead out onto the web and examine what other people have thought about this. Now, there's a legitimate reason I want you to do this. It's if someone else has done this type of analysis before, I definitely want to give credit, sort of acknowledge previous work. However, I have a feeling that that's unlikely to occur. And the reason is because if you go out onto the web and you examine any one of a number of blogs, forums, articles, and the like, you will find that much of it contradicts the analysis that you have seen here. Or I guess you could say that I'm contradicting them. The upshot is that in spite of the fact that this is a relatively straightforward and important question, there still seems to be quite a bit of controversy surrounding it. And so you have an opportunity to enter into that controversy and start the discussion from that point. Just to give you a little hint about where to go and what we're talking about here, you will see this particular stat being used, the standard deviations in Big Blind 100, which you can draw both out of Poker Tracker and out of HEM. You can discuss how this, I hate to call it a statistic, it's just a number really, but you can discuss how this particular number is used or misused or applied, however, and that will sort of set you in the direction for addressing the major controversy that seems to surround this issue. Okay, so there you have it. Just submit your answer. You'll be entered. You knew that Poker VIP coaching, had great rake-back deals, great poker coaching videos, and the like. What you didn't know is that we also were standing on the absolute cutting edge of poker theory. So you have an opportunity to enter into that debate and hopefully get some benefit out of the self-examination as well. So with that, this will be Dave Backwoods, aka Redshifted, Poker VIP Coaching, and I hope to see you in the forums. Okay, thanks.